The Rise of Black Sky, Chapter 7. My Declaration of War by author Ogosesere Samuel Uwinsuyi Edosomwan. Weakness had a surprised look on his face for a moment, but then he started laughing hysterically, as if he had just heard the funniest joke of all time. The merchant thought threatening all the slaves was a good way to deal with Weakness, and get him to stop killing in the first place. But once he heard his opponent's laughter, he had a bad premonition. At first, Weakness was looking Lu Ji in the eyes, but after he finished laughing, he turned his gaze to the top of the wall leading to the outer part of the city. Then, he disappeared again. Lu Ji noticed where his gaze was before he disappeared, so she turned in that direction. Moments later, Weakness reappeared. Then, he let his black weapon disappear, and raised his hand to the same level as his head. High above in the sky, a tiny black-violet dot appeared. It was so small that those in the crowd couldn't see it. As more time passed, the dot began to get bigger. The bigger the dot grew, the more powerful it became. Once it grew to be the size of a building, a powerful suction force started to manifest, causing the dot to float down and get closer to the slave town. Slowly, buildings and land started to rise into the sky and disappear behind the black-violet substance. As it grew, the dot started to suck up the slaves, too. Screams could be heard first at the edge of the city, as anything that didn't have the merchant's Tier 2 mid-level protection formation or above disappeared into the sky. The people around the merchant and Lu Ji were shocked by the absurd scene in front of them. It was like a black sky had appeared out of nowhere. Lu Ji's mouth was wide open, and her eyes shook out of fear when Weakness displayed his ability. She thought he had a rare teleportation ability, but after seeing the scene in front of her, she knew she couldn't be more wrong. The merchant was in a similar situation. What he saw made him think that the end of days had arrived, and he felt utterly powerless because he had no idea what to do. He panicked and shouted for everyone to aim at Weakness and kill him with nothing but fear of the unknown to drive them. Every source user working under the merchant in the city who could hear his voice and had their long-range weapons sent a barrage of attacks to where Weakness was standing. However, the closer those attacks got to Weakness, the more force was applied to them. Pretty soon everyone without protection was sucked into the sky. The whole slave town was covered overhead by the black-violet substance, and there wasn't a single slave, shack, structure, or foundation to be seen. After all the slave town and most of the outer part of the city was gone, Weakness put his hand down, causing the black-violet substance to shrink until it was completely gone.
Nothing in this life will ever hold me down again. I declare that, underneath the sun, only one of us will live. I won't allow something like you to draw breath for much longer.
He turned to Lu Ji. Instantly a chilling glare appeared in Weakness's eye.
While I may show mercy to most of these scum by killing them, I promise you that the gift of death won't come easily to you, because I will slowly and painfully pull you apart piece by piece over and over again until you beg for death. And even after that, it won't come.
Lu Ji had lived most of her life in princess-level luxury in a corrupt Tier 4 country. The first time she could recall seeing a slave getting killed was when she was 2 years old. Her father and mother showed her that a slave's life didn't matter because they could always get more slaves by forced breeding, kidnapping, war, debt, prison, and even student loans if the owner received higher education they couldn't afford. From then on, Lu Ji learned that free labor was the greatest resource of her country's entire economy, even though being Tier 4 meant they had to have a certain level of education to pass the standards of the country's alliance. Because the country funded the corrupt members of the alliance, no one was sanctioned to act and stop the enslavement that was occurring. Maybe it was her upbringing or simply a different view of life that she had. Still, Lu Ji enjoyed the feeling of elitism that being royalty in the country and possibly becoming its empress one day brought. She saw slaves as a never-ending resource that she could play with any way she saw fit. Lu Ji's parents went so far as to show her that she could kill one parent if a slave had a child. If the slave couple had 2 children, she could kill both parents to avoid suffering any loss in the long run. That's why, after killing a mother in front of her family that used to be 4, guards restrained the father by pulling him away from his eldest son and his youngest daughter. In his native language, The man screamed out a message to each of his children. Lu Ji was handed a dagger and shown all the vital spots of the human body. Without hesitation, she quickly made work of him. The guards let the man's corpse drop to the ground, then Lu Ji looked at his children and watched the daughter turn her head away and cry in the arms of her brother. Lu Ji loved this scene because it enforced her belief that cruelty would keep the slave's head down in fear, hoping not to be picked when someone else is selected to be used like a consumable. However, to her surprise, she saw a different look in the eyes of the slave's son, but she didn't understand what it was. It wasn't until years later when she saw her parents brutally murdered and their corpses paraded through the streets while her country was overthrown, that she understood the look in that boy's eyes that day. His hatred was the purest form of hatred that existed. It didn't fade with time, it only got stronger because it caused a toxic flame to burn inside a person. And the only way to get rid of any of those feelings was to inflict as much destruction on the target of that fury. That boy destroyed the whole Lu regime and publicly executed almost all the leader's family, the higher-ups in the government, their families, and all enslavers within 3 generations. Lu Ji only got out alive because she smuggled herself out of the country in a slave transport, which was how she met Robert. When Lu Ji saw the same look in Weakness's eye, she had a premonition of losing everything she had once again, so she screamed at the top of her lungs and frantically threw her dagger at his head. The weapon got some distance, but it was not enough to do anything to Weakness practically. The merchant boosted the dagger with his level 3 source manipulation, and without warning, the dagger was inches away from Weakness's head. Caught off guard, Weakness shifted away at the last moment and inwardly cursed.
He thought, damn it, I revealed one of my trump cards that I was going to show the next time we fought.
Before, Weakness left hints that the way his teleportation worked was that he had to see where he was teleporting to. By moving away from the dagger, he showed his ability to teleport reflexively and shift a few feet away from his previous location. Since he used such a move, he spent way more energy than expected and found himself tired. Weakness was decisive, so he teleported out of the area. Before, he never showed that he could teleport outside his eyesight because he wanted to buy as much time as possible for this moment. Once Weakness was nowhere to be seen, the merchant began ordering guards to check around the city for any traces of where Weakness could have gone. Lu Ji pointed out that she saw that Weakness would look where he would appear next, so they assumed that he was still in the city. 20 minutes later, miles away from the city, Weakness appeared on one of the routes back to the wasteland. He was drenched in sweat and unable to control his breathing.
Damn it, I can't keep this up much longer.
While the merchant and all his minions thought that Weakness was unfathomable and close to unbeatable, it couldn't be further from the truth. Weakness forcibly used a large amount of foreign source energy to empower his spirit and body within a concise amount of time. Due to the massive strain this left on him, he broke every bone, muscle, and nerve in his body with each movement, tearing apart his spirit repeatedly, while forcing his body to heal and strengthen again and again. While his body wasn't as skinny as before, he didn't consume any nourishment, so it was like using sand to build a castle. Once a strong enough breeze blew, it would bring everything toppling down. Now that he was far enough away to ensure no one could follow him, Weakness collapsed.
Don't have any more time,
said Weakness as a black-violet circle appeared in his hand. A bandaged and unconscious Daisuke was sucked out of the circle.
All these years I only counted on myself. Who would have known that I had to rely on someone else at the time of my victory?
Weakness put his hand on Daisuke's chest and let the black-violet energy sink into his body to heal him through both old and new wounds, while also removing the ruined bandages from his body. With each second that passed, Daisuke's complexion grew healthier while Weakness's only got worse. By the time he was done healing Daisuke, Weakness lost consciousness. Moments later, Daisuke slowly opened his eyes. At first, he wasn't sure what was going on, but as he traced his memories, all the painful truths came to the surface. Daisuke could only clench his fists hard enough to draw blood to keep himself from shedding a single tear. After letting his brain push the negative thoughts into the corner of his mind, he sat up and noticed that his best friend had collapsed beside him with his hand on Daisuke's chest.
Nothing made sense.
The last thing Daisuke remembered was the merchant's hand moving toward his head while he was severely injured, but he woke up in another location with weakness. He felt better than ever as the power he felt earlier was more stable, and he knew that he was now a Tier 3 way of the body source user. After looking at his surroundings, Daisuke recognized the familiar path and trees in the area, and decided on his next move.
The secret village for freed slaves has been compromised, so I need to get there as soon as possible to figure out what to do next. But Weakness doesn't look like he will last long enough to get there. I'll change my initial plan and go to our secret allies at the Winter Herb village. Weakness is in terrible shape, and they are the only people we can turn to when it comes to injuries.
Daisuke was confident that he could turn to the Winter Herb clan because they were one of the few secrets he had kept from Lu Ji. Daisuke had saved the village leader's daughter from being killed by beasts 2 years before, so he felt he could trust them because they repaid kindness with even greater kindness. Daisuke looked at Weakness and realized that, after so many years in bondage, he had never once called Weakness by any other name.
No longer will I allow anyone to call you by your slave name of Weakness. From now on, I will call you Pride, because when I think back on our bond, I can only feel pride.
After quickly formulating a plan, Daisuke ripped off his shirt and tied Pride to his back. He was glad that he had filled Pride's stomach with as much food as possible earlier, because he wouldn't have to worry about either of them starving in the next few days. He was concerned about Pride being unable to stand the temperature from the snow now that it was reaching the coldest temperature during the season of Evil Frost, so he circulated source energy throughout his body and directly into Pride to raise both of their body temperatures. With a firm plan in place and all his negative thoughts pushed down into the corner of his mind, Daisuke moved forward with newfound resolve.